Good morning. It's time for the real news. And now, here's Farron.
Hello and welcome to the Real News. We've got a lot to cover today. Our guest today is going to be Gretel Monroe of the International Coalition to Ban Uranium Weapons. We will be discussing the possible crimes against humanity being committed by our government with depleted uranium weapons. After our guest today, we will be discussing the comments by Michael Reagan that he made this past week concerning anti-war protesters and the 9/11 Truth Movement. I'm looking forward to getting into that. But first, let's finish up last week's subject of the Bilderberg meeting. After last week's broadcast, Brian went back to cover the last days of the Global Crime Syndicate's meeting. We will end this story by reiterating 120 or so of the world's most elite met in secret under heavy guard and not a peep from our press. A couple of fluff stories and that was it. Proof of a complicit controlled media. What if 120 NFL football players met in secret at a hotel and it was leaked to the press? The press would flock to cover it if it was known that it was happening. But here, the lapdog media stayed the course of the establishment puppet. So I'd like to go to Brian and ask you to comment on finishing up at the Bilderberg, what happened, what were some of the attendees, and what comments you might have on that.
Well, Farron, we got back up there last Saturday about 6 o'clock. We personally witnessed Madeleine Albright pull in. Sunday, we also saw Henry Kissinger, Ben Bernanke leaving. So,
wow.
And this, again, this isn't on mainstream media at all. In fact, we had in the local newspaper in the area, the Fairfax Times, a reporter there at Bilderberg, and of course this story did not appear in their newspaper. Instead, they had a story about a local pizza delivery man versus, the chairman of the Federal Reserve and all these other criminals meeting in their own backyard.
Covering absolutely no news while the biggest story happening in the world is right under their nose. Where's Lou Dobbs? Where's Geraldo Rivera? Where's Rush Limbaugh?
The Real News Radio was there.
And a handful of others, and that was it. And I also wanted to mention, we didn't say anything about this last week. While we were there, an armored guard vehicle, what's the proper term for it? The ones that carries the money?
Armored car.
Armored car. An armored car came in. I'm talking about one of those big ones.
Like a Wells Fargo.
Yeah, exactly. And it never left. It never left. And I don't know about you, but when a group of my friends get together, an armored car doesn't show up. Also, when me and my friends get together, a group doesn't show up to bullhorn us either. But I thought that was very interesting that they would need an armored car to show up, and it never did leave. And I don't know if it was full of money. They probably see money for what it is. Paper might have been full of gold. Who knows? But it did arrive, and it never did leave.
And again, as I mentioned last week, this is in clear violation of the Logan Act, which states our elected officials cannot meet in private with other private citizens or foreigners without the discretion of we the people.
Do you assume that they're in there setting policy, or do you think 120 of the world's most elite all fly to Chantilly, Virginia to play pinochle?
Well, in the wake of every Bilderberg, we see these enormous decisions. In the wake of this one, for example, we see Chairman of the Federal Reserve, Ben Bernanke, coming out Monday in a speech mentioning inflation 11 times in a speech that he gave. And then we see the Chairman of the Federal Reserve Bank in New York wanting to consolidate banking across the world. And we also see George Bush going on a tour of Europe. We see all these events right out of Bilderberg.
So you're thinking these were orchestrated from Bilderberg, and we're seeing the aftermath of the Bilderberg meeting this week.
And also Secretary of Defense Robert Gates was there, and George Bush is in Europe pushing for further sanctions against Iran.
Yeah, also, Jim Tucker has reported that microchipping was discussed there. Do you have any information on that?
That I don't. I did see that on Alex Jones' PrisonPlanet.com. But again, that's certainly been a major part of their agenda for a long time. As we know, the national security, being able to track every citizen in the United States, all their actions.
I found it interesting that although there wasn't a peep from the media here in the United States, and shame on our press, but the Czech foreign minister attended Bilderberg, and their press covered it. So around the world, other press covered it. Like you mentioned earlier, one of the reasons they like having it in the United States is the press in Europe is much more aggressive toward this. Isn't that a fact?
Oh, absolutely. Wherever they go in Europe, they're, harassed by the press. But That's exactly what should be happening here.
Yeah, here the silence is deafening, but so that's why they've attended here 3 times in the last 6 years, which normally they only attend once every 4
In
years.
2002, when they were in Chantilly, Jim Tucker was practically by himself out there.
Yeah, and he stated last week this was the biggest protest that he had seen in the United States, and I assume that when they are in Europe, they do have some larger protests. They protest what they believe in Europe, apparently a whole lot more than we do here in the United States. Sad to have to report. Can you give us any of the other members or any other update on how it ended before we go to a break?
We also had Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice there, Tom Daschle. We had the Queen of the Netherlands. We had the Chairman and CEO of the Washington Post, the editor of the Wall Street Journal. We had Vernon Jordan. We had
Mark Sanford.
Yes, Mark Sanford, Governor of South Carolina.
Possible
Vice presidential candidate for John McCain. Keep your eye out for that, because a lot of former attendees of Bilderberg have come out to be leaders in politics, such as Bill Clinton and, of course, John Edwards. And we also, of course, have Henry Kissinger and the legendary David Rockefeller.
All right, well, we're going to go to a break. We're going to come back with Gretel Monroe of International Coalition to Ban Uranium Weapons. If you're unfamiliar with this, I think you'll find it very interesting what's going on with our munitions and how it affects our troops and the terrain of Iraq and the Iraqi people. And after our guest, we will come back with phone calls, and we will start on the comments made by Michael Reagan, and we're going to play that for you after our guest. All right, we're back on the Real News. We had a little problem getting in touch with our guest there today, so we're going to just go on into the news. Our phone numbers are 704-873-1400. Our Davie County number is 336-499-0681. If you'd like to call in, we've got expanded time today for phone calls from our listeners, so feel free to jump in here and tell us what you think. Our website's realnewsradio.com, and our email is onair@realnewsradio.com. I'd like to start with ethics complaint filed against U.S. Attorney in the Ramos-Campion case. Christian pastor Don Swartout has filed an ethics complaint with the Texas Bar Association seeking an investigation of U.S. Attorney Johnny Sutton's performance during the prosecution of the U.S. Border Patrol agents Ramos and Campion. His complaint alleges that Sutton issued willfully misleading statements to the jury that convicted the 2 men of wrongfully shooting a drug smuggler attempting to cross into the United States. The drug smuggler, Davalia, was in the act of transporting $1 million worth of marijuana when intercepted by the 2 agents. When Ramos believed the man was about to shoot him, he fired, and one of his bullets hit the fleeing smuggler in the buttocks. Davalia nevertheless escaped across the border, not seriously hurt. Sutton charged the 2 men with acting without proper supervisor approval, moving spent shell casings, and not properly reporting that they had fired shots at a suspect. The 2 are serving 11 and 12-year sentence in solitary confinement in a federal prison. What a complete travesty of any simulation of justice. The convictions of Ramos and Campion have been questioned by many who insist the jurors were not informed of Davidia's continued drug trafficking and were not told that the Border Patrol agents who testified against the 2 men was a lifelong friend of the smuggler. Swartout also wonders why several jurors claim they were pressured to rendering a guilty verdict. Did you hear this corrupt officials worked extra hard and railroaded